So today we're going to be doing an exercise in understanding how to do single weight line drawing. Sometimes it can get complicated understanding the difference of simplifying an illustration. If we're looking at a photo of a blimp, a baseball, a fish, or a light bulb, we can see the depth of the image with the shadows, with the color, and showing the form of the object itself. In a standard illustration, we try to replicate some elements of this, breaking down into simplified form, seeing the lines itself, getting the shape of the object, possibly adding in little details that go into defining the overall image, whether it's the red stripes on the ball, or getting the lines of the blimp, or thinking about the shadows that can be cast from each object. But the difference with a single weight line drawing is it's more icon based. Having an icon, we need to think about simplified forms, being able to convey what we're trying to get across in the simplest way possible. Though the meaning of single weight line drawing comes from maintaining the same thickness throughout the stroke, it's also more of the simplest form that we can visibly see for the overall image. So it's not too complicated. So if we're looking at the blimp, and we're going to go through each one, understanding how we can use the tools in Gravit or in Illustrator to really just grasp the understanding of how these work. So if I'm looking at the blimp itself, I can click on the pen tool, and I'm going to zoom in to get closer. Control plus sign if you're on a Windows, Command plus sign if you're on a Mac. But I don't really even need to look at the actual illustration to understand that I want to take away the depth that the original blimp is creating. I don't need to show that the front element is larger than the back of it to make it appear as if it's coming at us. We need to simplify it and keep it to the most basic form of how we would normally see this. So starting out with the pen tool, I can look to build out an elongated ovular shape that has more of a point towards the back end. With the pen tool, I can click a point. I'm going to look to round out the top front. It can have a little bit sharper edge on the front, but as we get to the back, we want to have it more narrow. So I can look to click and drag again to create that curve. And if I want to modify the anchor point, I can click on the anchor point and look to then create my own curve for the overall shape. So if I hit escape, I can end the line where I'm at, and understand we can use what we have to replicate or create a shape to match it to the overall design. So if I wanted to be consistent, I can look to replicate this or rotate this and flip it to the opposite direction. So if I do Control C, Control V, and then go up to Modify, Transform, and Flip Vertical, I can then look to place and arrange stacking this image so that it is facing each other, creating more of the form of the object. Then with the pen tool, I can look to combine the shapes. If I zoom in closer, I want to select on one with Move tool first, or the pointer tool first. Click on the pen, click on that point, and then I want to connect it over to the other area. It's just a matter of really understanding that we're looking to simplify it as easily as possible. Then we can look to add on the back details. These fins that help it go in different directions. Again, I'm not looking to overcomplicate it. I can hold shift to maintain proportional lines, and then hit escape to end the line. And again, I could also select this object out, Control C, Control V, modify, transform, and flip vertical. Then moving this down so it's going to appear on the bottom and the top. Other elements that we might want to incorporate: the area in which the pilots would be, just another bridge. And with the line, we don't necessarily want to have all these different lines. One or two, maybe three, will really help to understand and show the form of the shape. So again, with the pen tool, I can look to use the pen, draw through the image, hit escape to end the line, I can click and drag to create the bend, but I'm looking to again go back towards the back of the blimp to give it that overall shape. Then rather than having to redraw that same line, again we can look to select it, use the pointer, click on the line, Control C, Control V, modify, transform, and flip vertical, and slide it down into the correct location. So you can see that we're coming up with a simplified form that still represents and still identifies as a blimp, but in the simplest way form. We can then look to modify the thickness, defining what weight we want to have. But you can see the difference from the more detailed illustration that we have in the middle in comparison to a more iconic, simple image that is going to represent the blimp itself. I can always change the color. That is your choice. If I want to modify the thickness, again, I can look to reduce it if I feel it's too heavy. But still represents the overall image in the quickest fashion possible. Same thing with the baseball. Again, we're not looking to overcomplicate it. Use simple shapes that are provided for you. I go over to the Shapes tool, click on the ellipse, click, and as I drag, hold Shift to maintain proportions. I can modify my color over on the right side navigation, the fills. I'm going to put this back to white. And add a border to thicken this up. And I'll maintain it at 3 pixels. And that 3 pixels will be consistent for the ridges or the grip of the baseball. So with the pen tool, I'm going to look to draw out the curve. With the pen tool, I'm going to simply look to create the curve. I don't necessarily have to show every element of it, but just the basic curve over on the left side. I can hold Shift to make sure that I'm going to maintain in the correct location. Then I can click, release the Shift, and draw out the curve shape. And hit Escape to end the line. Again, we can look to add the stitching in using the pen tool. And again, we don't necessarily need to add many of these. We're not trying to get it precise, just a matter of making it appear as if it conveys what we're trying to get across. But I'm going to select it to make sure that it still maintains the 3 pixels and stays in the same color. You can always add the colors, you're not limited, but understand the difference between each. Rather than redrawing it again, you can select it, Control C, Control V. I can use the arrow keys to slide it down, move it into the correct location and where I want it. Again, we just want to move the stitching down into the proper location, spreading it out. I'm going to do about 5 on each side. Control C, Control V. Rotate slightly, and then use the arrow keys to adjust it into the correct location. Once I have the stitching for the one side, I want to simply just take what I already have given to me. Control C, Control V. Let's copy and paste. Go to Modify, Transform, and flip horizontal. And then I can shift this line over to the right side. If you need to modify it, or if you feel like the lines on the inside are too strong, I could look to scale these down and then look to shift them out to the left and right side of the ball. So that's how simple the ball shape can be. Again, we're not looking to overcomplicate it. If you feel that the thickness of the strokes is too much, just reduce it down, just maintain the same thickness. And I can always rearrange it or place it again because of the new thickness. Save the fish for last just because that's the more complicated, seeing the bending of the fish. But for the light bulb, again, just like we did with the blimp, we're going to look to draw out one half of it, and then we can replicate to the other side for the top portion. You can also use combining shapes. So if I wanted to use the shapes tool, draw out the circle shape, that way it gives me a perfect circle for that top portion of the bulb. I can then use the pen tool to give myself the line that I'm looking for to match the shape. But I'm not going to look to replicate it. I'm going to look to cut this circle in half. I can select the circle. I'll put this to black and white so we can see it a little bit better. So to cut the circle in half, I can use the knife tool. And with the knife, I'm going to look to split down the middle of the circle shape. Click and drag downward. That cuts the circle in half. Then I can use the pointer tool, select the right half, delete that out. So to make sure that we have the perfect shape that we can create the bowl, I'm going to look to use the knife with the drawn out shapes. With the knife, I'm going to look to split this in half, cutting down the middle of the circle and the additional area of the bulb that I added with the pen tool. I can use the pointer tool to select out the pieces that I do not want. Using the pen tool, I can look to select and add in the selection to create that left half of the bulb. We can use the shapes to be combined, create the compound shape at the top navigation, so it becomes one shape. I'm going to go over to my settings, change the color, so we're going to go white for the fill, and add a border. Again, looking to thicken this up. I'll go 3 pixels. Selecting out the shape, I'll do Control C, Control V. Modify, transform, or flip horizontal. Slide this piece over. I'm going to look to merge these two pieces together. I need them to slightly overlap. I can highlight both pieces and again go over to the create compound shape and do the union so it becomes one shape and we get the bulb. Then we can look to add in the more spiral effect. Again, we can use simple lines, the pen tool with the 3-point. I'm going to make sure that I have the black as my border color and change the thickness to 3 pixels. Rather than redrawing this line 3 times, I can use the arrow key and create copies. Using the arrow keys, just slide this down into location. If I want any additional elements, I can use the ellipse again. I'll do more of an oval shape this time. And I'll cut this in half with a knife as well. You can select the top portion. Change the shape with a border, adding the thickness of the stroke, and eliminate out the foreground color. Other effects that you may want to consider adding, maybe just a line element that goes inside to help create the sense of form. Or I can look to add the shine elements rather than adding in another color. We can just simply look to add in lines around the area. To create the sense that it wraps around the bulb, I'm going to look to replicate this. Control C, Control V. Slide this down. Select both copies. Control C, Control V. Then I'm going to look to rotate this piece. Modify, transform, rotate 90 degrees. Select all 4 pieces. Control C, Control V. Again, modify, transform. This is going to be this time 45 degrees. And then I can take out this bottom line that I don't need, that is interfering, but still maintaining that perfect alignment of those other lines around the bulb. But there are many different ways of creating that same type of shape or something similar. You can see that the thickness of the lines may be too much if you have a smaller image. So modify the line thickness. Bring it down to 2. We can also keep the bottom very simple. Use the pen tool. Create more of a half shape on the bottom. I can change the color out back to black and modify the pixels. And get the same effect. With the fish, we're going to look to flatten out the overall idea. Again, like the blimp, we don't necessarily need to be showing the depth of it getting larger as it gets closer to the screen, but just getting the overall shape of the fish, and then possibly adding in elements to make it look like the tail might be bent or be behind the actual body of the fish. So again, with the pen tool, I want to keep it simple. I'm going to look to draw out the head shape first. For the fish body, I'm not going to overcomplicate it. I can click a point to end the anchor. Look to bend out the bottom portion for the mouth to help show the difference. And click and drag again to create the curves and close up the shape. So we have the beginning of the fish. Then we can look to add in the fin just to give it an identifier. And same thing, adding in a fin on the side to let it know, or let people understand it is a fish. Normally this would be a longer body, but I'm also looking to help kind of create the tail being facing off to the side. So from where the back tail is, or back of the body is right now, I'm going to look to make a triangular shape. Basically folding it, making it look two-dimensional. Then I can add in the fin. Again, not looking to overcomplicate it, but simplifying it in the most simplistic fashion to be able to identify it is a fish. Then I can use the shapes tool for the eye. I can hold shift. The color is different. We can change that when I'm all done. Again, adding in that border, but selecting out the area. I can change the color for the border. Change the fill, making sure that it's all white. You can see that it does overlap on the back fin itself. If I want to modify this, I can always look to just simply push this back behind the body layer. So modify, arrange, send to back. And then we get that back. If I want to modify the location for the side fin, I can adjust it into the location that I want. Or if I don't necessarily want it folding, I can look to then create more of a longer body. Control C, Control V. And I can use the sub select to modify the shape, giving it the longer body. But still taking the same elements. Get the eyes, the two fins, Control C, Control V, slide down into location. And this time I can take the tail, Control C, Control V, rotate it, and slide it onto the back of the fish. but it's still a two-dimensional shape overall. Again, I can modify the thickness of the stroke if I want it thicker. But you can see how we've simplified the forms overall so that it is more iconic and it will be less time consuming rather than trying to draw out a detailed variation of the subject you're trying to create.